I am Sensei Tony, and welcome to the House of Meditation. Namo Fudabosa, Namo Fudabosa, Nam Food Bowls. Let us celebrate the liturgy of the day. Let us share the peace. We all beings awaken to that peace which is our true home. Let us take refuge. I take refuge in the ground of being, within which I live and move and breathe. Let us make the accord. I take sanctuary in the heart of being, accepting all of my delusions in thought, word, or deed, born of ignorance, hatred, and greed. Let us give thanks. I give thanks for all things awakening to the interbeing of all nature. May my heart be open and my mind clear. May all be free from suffering and the causes of suffering, and may all come to know that peace which is born of insight and understanding. Since it is the practice of enlightenment, that practice has no beginning. And since it is enlightenment within the practice, that realization has no end. So tonight we're going to continue with the last section of my newest book, The Three Principles of Oneness, How Embodying the Cosmic Perspective Can Liberate Your Life. The last section of the book is called Ask Sensei. And these are questions that I get, historically questions that I get every week from folks just wanting my opinion on different life matters. So tonight's talk is about a subject we probably all know very well. And the question was, dear Sensei, how do I learn to stop worrying? So tonight's reading is from David Bowie and his song, Pressure. It's the terror of knowing about what the world is, watching some good friend scream, let me out. Let me say that again. It's the terror of knowing about the world and what it is, watching some good friend shout, let me out. I think we all know that song pretty well, right? So it's the terror of knowing what this world's all about. and whether that good friend is someone else or it's when we look in the mirror, we've all had our times of shouting, let me out. I just want to get off. And probably more than anything else, worrying is something that plagues us all. So in order for us to get a handle on what worrying is, we have to start with the cosmic perspective. And when I use that expression, cosmic perspective, what I'm saying is we want to learn or gain knowledge about the universe and about ourselves with the best tools that we can. And the best tool that we have now is science. Science is a tool. Science is really not a philosophy. Science is not a religion. Science is not absolute in any fashion. And science is constantly changing because the knowledge is constantly changing. And it's really important to understand that even though I believe that modern folks have to find a grounding in some scientific understanding, it doesn't mean that science is where the answers to our questions about life will come from. That's wisdom. So it's always important to understand that science is the handmaiden of wisdom, the servant of wisdom, and not the other way around. Too often today, we get those confused. And those of us who really appreciate and try to understand the scientific endeavor, we know this. But I think in the popular parlance, there's a pedestrian sort of view that science has all the answers. And that science in some way is absolute. And if there's anything that we've learned through this crisis we've all been going through, is that that's not the case. But all that being said, it's still our best source of knowledge right now. You know, maybe someday, as Carl Sagan said, there'll be another source that will give us a whole new look. But for now, it's our best bet. So when we look at things from the cosmic perspective. We're trying to understand the nature of the universe and what we've learned. And what we've learned is, with regard to this idea of worrying, is that this is a very old aspect of our collective being. In other words, from the time that life first formed on this planet, from singular cell creatures to the rise of reptiles, and mammals, and us, this instinct for survival is something that is primary. And when you look at the evolution of human beings, you realize that it isn't something that just happened at a certain point, that this was something that we were born with, and it's something that has evolved over time. And human beings like us are most closely related to our human ancestors that were called Homo sapiens sapiens. And the rise or the emergence of these types of beings is probably only around a couple 100,000 years. And if you think of the environment, and so what I'm saying is their brains and our brains are pretty much the same. Their nervous systems and our nervous systems are pretty much the same. And if you think about the environment they were in compared to the environment we're in now, man, it's so vastly different. And if you think about it as the span of somewhere around 150 to 200,000 years, and you realize that human history that we actually have some clear knowledge of is only around, at best, 5,000 years, and maybe might push that out another 5,000, but it gets a little dicier the further we go out. That's not much time in that span. And when you think of the advances that have gone on over the last 200 years, these last 2 centuries, wow, I mean, you can't even compare it. But you still have the same nervous system, the same human brain now, in light of this advancement of technology that our ancestors never could have imagined. Even folks living 3,000 years ago couldn't have imagined the world that we live in. And so this is where the problem comes. And that our nervous system, our brains, were designed for something that evolutionary psychologists call immediate return. And animals still live in that world. Animals live in the world of immediate return. Now, what does that mean? Well, immediate return is the reference to the idea that if I'm hungry, right, I go and get something to eat. I go and get some fruit off of a tree, or I hunt down another creature. If a predator is coming for me, I run somewhere to escape, or I climb somewhere to hide. But that's it. There's just not a whole lot of thinking that goes on beyond that, and the return on my actions is immediate. And you see this in our animal companions. You know, my beloved cat, Sir Basil, he lives in the world of immediate return. And that's an easy world, relatively speaking, in that everything is now. Everything is now. When he's hungry, he goes out and gets some food, or he waits for me to be in the kitchen, and then he waits for me to give him his special snacks. He eats, and then he's done. If he's outside and he senses a predator or something of that nature, he reacts to that, and once that's over, he's back to licking himself. There's no prolonged worry about, will he eat tomorrow? There's no worry about, is he safe now? He lives in the world of immediate return. And that's the world we lived in for tens of thousands of years. And our ancestors going back millions of 2 million years. But yet we have the same brain now. But now we live in this world that evolutionary psychologists call delayed return. We live in the world of delayed return. And that means that it's not the simple life that my cat has. It means we are constantly planning and thinking about not just am I going to eat today, but am I going to eat a year from now? Not am I safe in this moment where I don't perceive any threats, but will I be safe a week from now, a month from now, years from now? Heck, we buy life insurance policies. We plan for retirement. So we have this delayed return thing going on. And the problem is, our brains and our nervous system are set up for immediate return. So we're living in a world that you could say is mismatched. And especially the last 100 years. So what do? How do we react to that? Worry. We worry. That's what we do. We worry. It's mostly related to the future, but it can be influenced from the past. You know, we can project some circumstance from the past on to the present, and then we worry about what that's going to mean. Now, psychologists will divide worry, stress, and anxiety up. So how they typically do it today is they will say that worry is mental. The stress is the reaction to worry. And the combination of those are what we call anxiety, is what we call anxiety. That's how they kind of structure it. And I think it's pretty good. I think you could argue certain things. I think that you have to understand that the mind and body are not two but one, just like practice and enlightenment. And so that interaction, that interdependence is seamless. But I would say that the mind, based on my understanding and based on our teachings, that the mind is primary, but the body and the mind are one. And we have another interesting factor in our neuro makeup. And the other interesting factor about that is we have what psychologists call a default mode. So we have a default mode. And that default mode is constantly processing and thinking. You might even relate it to some degree to the idea people talk about as the subconscious mind. It's kind of going on automatic. And so even when you're doing something like we're sitting here, your default mode is still working. And so even when you're here, there's a part of you that's worried, that's working things out. And so when you look at it from that point of view, or that perspective, it kind of lays it out pretty neatly, that that's why we worry. Worrying is an adaptation to the changes that have occurred to humans as they evolved. And as they evolved out of a world of an immediate return into a world of delayed return. And so here we are. Here we are. So that's the why. Now what's the what? What's the purpose of worrying? Well, that's not hard to see either. Humans evolved with this survival instinct driving. And they evolved in ways that they developed very sophisticated forms of worrying. And the brightest among us have very sophisticated default modes. And so we learned how to plan, how to build, how to work with all those pressures coming from delayed return. And that's worry. And it serves that purpose. Now, I wouldn't go so far as to say that anxiety and depression are purely the result of these processes. We know that the body can affect the mind. But I think that largely, for most, that's what creates anxiety and depression. It's when whatever worrying method we've used is not really working. That's when these other things kick in. Some evolutionary psychologists believe that anxiety was important to human beings, not only to help them survive, but worrying was important because it helped them to plan. And probably the reason that we all have the intelligence that we have is because we have Neanderthal genes. Recent studies have found that there's a relationship there. Well, those Neanderthals, those people had to survive in the harshest, coldest climates this planet has ever seen. And they had to plan, and they had to work out all those problems. And what that did was it made their brains evolve. And we've inherited that from them. And so there we are. So if we look at it more positively and we say, well, anxiety is the result of us having these big brains, this neocortex, where we can actually think about the past and the future in the way that a creature of immediate return doesn't. But the problem is that worrying mechanism creates stress in the body. And if we don't have a good worrying tool, then that stress kills us. American Medical Association has said that the majority of diseases are related to stress. So what do? We have to find a better way to work with these natural systems. And fortunately for us, that's where these teachings come into play. I don't know if it's entirely accurate or not, but in some ways you can think of the Buddha as the proto-psychotherapist. His second discovery of fire, as I call it in the book, was the realization that the mind, that is the power that we all have within us. And that it is the power over all these other things. But that we have to learn to skillfully work with the mind, to turn the mind into an ally. Because often, like in the song by David Bowie, we just get overwhelmed and we just want to escape. So his insight, his pioneering understanding, created a spiritual technology that we are the inheritors of. And it's wonderful. It's a wonderful gift. So what is that gift? Well, it's, in a word, mindfulness. It's the way of mindful living. Now, how does that work specifically? It works on all those areas. So let's first deal with the stress part. So let's go along with the psychologist and say that stress is something we're going to talk about as a physical reaction to worry. One of the things that we learn to do in the way of mindful living is we learn how to do practices to calm the body. The primary practice we employ is the practice in meditation and the use of the breath. Another tool of meditation is what I call moving meditation. So practices like Tai Chi, practices like yoga. These are the practices that work with the body. and help to relieve the body of its stress. But the biggest practice that we have is the practice of mindfulness. That practice allows us to understand and to go in and challenge our worry so that we might develop a more skillful application. Now, one of the things that meditation is, by learning to sit, by using the breath to ground us, we can learn to observe without judgment that default mode. That default mode that's always going on, we start to bring the unconscious into conscious awareness. And one of the side effects of that is that we don't react. We learn to respond. And another side effect of that, which relates to the second principle of oneness, is that it increases our creativity. The more that we're aware of that default mode, and the more that we can interact with it with mindfulness practices like the 4 questions, the stronger and more resilient we become. And we take those natural tools or those natural things and we work with them mindfully, creatively, for our benefit and for the benefit of others. The most powerful tool in dealing with stress is that we can choose one thought over another. And the thing that's beautiful about mindfulness practice is that we're not waiting until something happens. We're engaging our minds daily. We're training our minds through our various practices to serve us, to serve our intentions. And through the 4 questions of mindfulness, we can take a situation that we're worried about and we can break it down. We can discover the interdependent chain of causation in the mind. We can take the situation and look at the stress in the body that it came out of. And we can look at the emotions that arose out of it. And then we can find out the thoughts driving the strongest emotion. And then we can find the strongest thought or belief that's the source of that chain. And then we can challenge it. We take the sword of wisdom and we slice through delusion. We wrap up our obsessions and we slice them with the sword of wisdom. And we then find out what their source is and we expose them to the light and show their delusory content. And when we do that, we immediately feel a shift. That's what I always say to people. If you do the 4 questions properly, you will always experience a shift, and often you will experience it in the body too. One of the signs I always look for when I'm working for someone is how they physically respond. And one of the most common responses is they will begin to yawn. You will see their whole body relax, and they might sit back a bit. And they'll yawn and go, excuse me. And I'll say, no, that's good. That's the sign I'm looking for. Because when we yawn, we're trying to get more oxygen to the brain. We're relaxing the body. And so you see it, you feel it, you experience it. And always the 4 directions or the 4 questions as a practice, within the 4 directions, you always are led to an action. So it's never enough to just have an insight. My equation is insight plus creative experimental action equals realization. That you really can't experience a total shift in your consciousness unless you have both. And those actions, again, we have this wonderful toolbox of technologies. one of the things that mindfulness teaches us, and one of the actions that we can take in response to worry, is we can learn to take things and do them in pieces. So what I mean by this is that we can learn to take situations, maybe something in the future, maybe something big, and we can break it down so that each day we're doing some sort of practice to get us toward whatever end we're looking at. And it's very powerful. One of the practices that I've found very useful to me, for example, is that in order to help me deal with worry in a positive way, if I have a goal or a situation in my little black book, I write down the things that I want to accomplish. And each day I go through, at the end of that day, I cross off and I write it down. You can use your iPhones, your iPads, but I like to write it down. There's something about that. And sometimes I'll even say it out loud to myself. And I scratch it off. And each day, as it goes by, I see this chain of creativity happening. And that's why I've been able to achieve the goals that I've had in my life. Because I don't make them some mountain out here that I have to somehow get from point A to Z. I focus on B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. That's the greatest way as far as action goes. Once you have the insight from the 4 questions, to take action and work at whatever it is each day. And the miracle is that once you start to do that, you'll find that you're wasting less and less time thinking about that. You don't really think about that mountaintop too much because you're on the path. And you know that as you're on a path, sometimes you may have to go a different direction. And so you learn to become more flexible. And yet, you're doing something every day. And so it helps to assuage that delayed return. Other practices that we can do in order to work with that is to make sure before we go to sleep at night that we have that list. So that's what I do with my black book. At night, I write down everything that I want to do that next day. So when I go to sleep, I don't lay there and think about everything. I've already got it all laid out. And there's one of the answers, questions and answers in my book here. I talk about how to mindfully do your day and mindfully prioritize. And it works. It works. And so I don't sit around worrying at night about the next day. And I don't get up in the morning thinking, oh, what I gotta do, what I gotta do. I know what I have to do. It's in that little black book. And so I can take my time, and when I get to that black book, I see the things that I have to do, and I do. Simple as that. I was talking to my wife earlier, and I was thinking about this question and asking myself, do I worry? And I can honestly say, I really don't worry. I don't really spend any time worrying. That doesn't mean that I don't have apprehensions sometimes or questions that arise when I'm trying to make a decision about something. But I don't worry. You know, I sleep like a baby. I don't sit around worrying about it. And like I said, the best antidote to when I get myself in that space is to make sure that I have those things, those practices like the journal, and do something. Even if I do something very small. I remember one time I was working with a person who was laid up in bed and was so depressed that they couldn't get out of bed. So I actually made a house visit. And this person was in their mind all kinds of reasons why they were depressed, and they were basically bedridden. There was nothing really wrong with them physically. but they wouldn't leave. And everybody was trying to get them from being bedridden to being normal or out doing the regular thing again. And even this individual kind of looked at it that way. And so as we began to work together, I said, all right, each day I'm going to have you do a practice. And I said, now let me ask you this. Do you get up to go to the bathroom, or do you, I don't know, what's the old expression, piss in a pot? I mean, what do you do? Well, he got up and went to the bathroom. I said, okay, so you're getting up at least at those moments. And when you get up at those moments, I want you to want to do one thing for me. I want you to create a centering space. And so maybe the first day you get up, you go to the bathroom and your centering space is, okay, I'll put the object there. Okay, now I'm going back to bed. That's fine. The next day, I don't know, maybe I put a candle out. And it took him a week to put together a centering space. And that's all he did. When he got to go to the bathroom, he did that and went back to bed. And I didn't demand anything else. Because I knew this was the way that was going to get him out of that. I couldn't drag him out of that bed and force him to do it. There was too much conditioning. And so after a week of that, I said, now when you go to the bathroom, I want you to light some incense and bow. Take refuge in your true self. So that became his practice. And as we went on, week by week, with small little practices, within a month and a half, about 6 weeks, he was out of that bed. He was no longer in that bed. And he was facing his life and dealing with it. But that's how it has to be. If you try sometimes to go from point A to Z, you're never going to get there. Because that's another side effect of worry. Putting stuff off. Procrastinating. So one step at a time. You know, we say that, we hear that in all those ancient wisdoms, one step at a time. But it is the truth. But each step we take has to be undergirded by the strength of our clarity of mind. And we do not let a day go by that we do not engage in a practice. If we do, we won't yield that fruit. So the thing that we can do for each other is to encourage that daily practice. And we will learn to make worry like a horse that we ride. And we will learn to deal with that delayed return in a way that serves us and doesn't take us down. The moment we receive true and trusting, solid and clear like a diamond, infinite light and life embrace and protect us, liberating us completely. Let us take together the 4 immeasurable vows. Sentient beings are numberless, I vow to liberate them. Delusions are endless, I vow to end them. The ways of compassion and wisdom are boundless, I vow to embody them. The way is unattainable, I vow to attain it. Let us take the precepts for the community of the vow. I allow my true self to manifest in all aspects of life. I take complete responsibility for my own life and all of my actions. I affirm my personal being and acknowledge it as a path to awakening and freedom. I embrace all aspects of my personal being, including my shadow, so that they may be transformed. I affirm an attitude of openness to my true self, even in the midst of suffering. We will now offer incense, and I encourage you to offer incense at your home altars. And then we will chant the mantra. Tonight we will chant the Nembutsu, the ancient mantra of taking refuge in our true self for our sake and the sake of all beings. And then after the incense offerings are complete, we will then spend some time just abiding. Excuse me. realizing that we never practice alone, not just for ourselves. Let us recite together the Bodhisattva Gata. We dedicate this practice to the welfare of all beings throughout space and time. May it always be so. Amen. Well, that concludes tonight's service. Thank you for joining us wherever you are. Please visit our newest website, AskSenseiTony.com, to see all the different programs that we offer, whether you're looking for personal practice or guidance, which we can do entirely online, or you're interested in going deeper in your practice, maybe becoming a member of the Sangha, or even more so in terms of a life of service, our teacher training.